I am absolutely delighted to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day. Saber Parian is an engineer and independent scholar of the Elamite language. His research interests include Elamite and Babylonian languages and the cuneiform writing system, which he's learned in 2011. Since 2013, he's expanded his work into Middle and Neo-Elamite texts, and in 2020, he published a new edition of the Elamite version of the Behistun Inscription, which is one of the most well-known cuneiform texts, and his edition is incredibly important to the field of Assyriology, so we're all very grateful that he's taken the time and trouble to do that work. We're thrilled to have him here to talk to us about his translation of that important inscription. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Shall I start my talk?
Yes, please do.
If you agree, I share my screen. Okay. Are you seeing the first slide? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to give a lecture in the conference. I am Saber, Parian. I would like to talk about the Behistun inscription and a research on its Elamite version. The experiences I have gained and address to other scholars and students who are eager to do research on the cuneiform inscription. The Behistun monument is situated high up on a precipice of a gully running into Mount Behistun, and is located near Kermanshah in the west of Iran. The Behistun monument, which overlooks the main ancient road connecting Babylon to Media, was established by Darius the Great in the second half of the 6th century BC to commemorate his achievements in suppressing revolt through the Achaemenid Empire. It consists of several reliefs that represent his victories over the rebel kings and several inscriptions around. The inscription has a reputation among Assyriologists for its major role in the decipherment of the other cuneiform texts. It is a royal declaration events that happened in the Achaemenid Empire a short time before Cambyses' expedition to Egypt and the victorious battles against rebellious kings shortly after his accession to the throne. It contains a trilingual inscription written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, has 3 versions of the same text. Each version is arranged in a number of columns in which the text is divided into paragraphs like Darius the king says. Since the inscription is laid almost 100 meters above the ancient road, and the access road has been removed by stone cutters, and that they have cut and exported the rocks surrounding the inscription at the end, therefore reaching the inscription has become almost impossible for ordinary people. This largely prevented it from human damages, while it has been difficult for scholars to reach the inscription for a close study. Over the centuries, natural elements clearly eroded its cuneiform text. Generally, the erosion has been caused by rain and drifting sands, streams consisting of water in solution with calcareous compounds having flown over the inscription and deposits remaining on the surface. Due to these erosion parts, the cuneiform signs are partially legible at best, while in some others, they have become illegible or entirely lost. Other natural phenomena, such as rock fissures, has caused damage to some sculpture and cuneiform signs. Several reasons might be suggested that the stone cutters who smoothed the rock and the engravers who incised the signs had been aware of such natural phenomena, and so they took some measures to reduce the damage to the inscription in later eras. Like Water and Kelman from Water and children who have studied the insect have also discussed some visible errors. Such mentioned features and the difficulty of accessing the Behistun inscription demonstrates the importance of rereading its text. In the last 2 centuries, its cuneiform texts have been documented and closely studied in a few occasions. At the interval between 1835 and 1847 by Henry Rawlinson, 1803 by Abraham Valentine William Jackson, 1904 by Leonard King and Campbell Thompson, and 1957 by George Galen Cameron, and 1963 by Hans Luschai and Leo Trampelman. They attempt to document the inscription and obtain a copy of cuneiform text in order to collect and enhance previous editions. Despite these admirable efforts, unfortunately, there have been some deficiencies in their studies. They provided copies of the inscriptions employing methods that are today dated, such as drawing of signs, paper or latex impression, or photography by artists. Due to inaccuracy of prior copies in representing details of the original engravings, they offer limited help to archaeologists to provide improved editions. Scholars who want the Behistun inscription had no choice but to refer to these copies so that their studies retain embedded errors and contains unread gaps and doubtful readings. Most of the published editions are not accompanied by detailed photographs or even a hand copy and cannot be verified to any satisfactory degree. It is an unfortunate truth that the quizzes resulting from George Cameron's close study in 1948 were mostly damaged, and in 1957 he was able to secure only quizzes of the Babylonian version. Published in King and Thompson in 1907 does not adequately represent the idiosyncrasies of the original engravings and has been effectively impossible for archaeologists to judge many of their readings. Later on, Rüdiger Schmidt examined the photos which Luschai and Trampelman had taken in 1963, then published the edition of the Old Persian version in 1991. This was more improved than previous editions. However, as the photos he used were taken by the earlier generation cameras that were not high-resolution ones, they also had limited help to clearly display the faint traces of damaged signs. Thus, some parts of the Schmidt edition need to be studied again. Now, before we get into the Elamite version, let's have a brief talk about the older one, which is placed to the right of the reliefs. Several pieces of evidence substantiate that the older Elamite version, which was arranged in 4 columns, was the first to be inscribed in Behistun. But since it became necessary later to make room for the relief of the captured Stygian sepulchre, this version was erased by the same engravers, and then, as it copied the newer Elamite, was written beneath the Babylonian version. The newer Elamite version, or hereafter the Elamite version, contains 3 large columns with totally 260 lines. It has got severe erosion as well. Regarding the first column, 2 streams of water and calcareous compounds have flown over it. Meanwhile, several cracks are extended. Furthermore, a solution of water and calcareous compounds have flown over the first column and not only has produced a ravine, but also left tufa deposits on its surface. Accordingly, many passages in the first and third columns have become entirely illegible, and the faint traces are somehow visible at best. However, fortunately, the second column is almost intact and its text is clearly legible. Just as the Babylonian version, the Elamite has been arranged in 54 paragraphs, except the first paragraph, each one begins, "and Darius the king says." Linguistically, his text is classified in the group of the royal declaration written in Achaemenid Elamite. It should be mentioned that it is the longest Elamite text ever found. For a long time, two copies of the Elamite version, which were the results of the closer study of the inscription, has been available for studies by Assyriologists. Nuris's place published in 1855, taken from the papers quizzes that Henry Rawlinson had taken in 1844. King and Thompson cuneiform texts in the edition of the trilingual inscription in 1907. Nuris's plays were made in the era when Assyriology was in its early stages. What we know about the era is that some Elamite texts, especially the royal Achaemenid inscriptions, had just been copied and translated, and a study of the language was in its early stages. Therefore, the appearance of these places from the Behistun inscription was considered a great step forward to better understand as well as a closer study of the language. Nuris drew the wedges using a pantograph and colored the intact ones. According to the illustrations, he outlined the wedges or partially colored them. However, these plays don't reflect the real details of the engraving and imperfections. They were indeed taken just from Rawlinson's paper cast, not directly from the inscription itself. I conjecture some legible signs were not completely squeezed by Rawlinson, and this caused a misunderstanding by Nuris. Consequently, his plays couldn't be a basis for new research on the Elamite version today. Furthermore, in my survey, many of the illustrations don't match the visible traces or available spaces in the gaps. We restored many phrases comparing with old Persian and even Babylonian correspondences in Behistun. In this slide, I have shown that, for instance, his restorations of Harry Cash in lines 11 and 26 in the first column is just based on comparing the old Persian equivalents. Meanwhile, for some others, he just copied from the other Elamite texts from Persepolis and Naxxrostam, which Westergaard and Lassen had published before. I can refer to the name of the subjected nations in paragraph 6, which he had restored. Following Nuris, King and Thompson visited the inscription in 1904 and published the edition of the trilingual text in 1907. As the knowledge of the three languages has been increased since Rawlinson, this edition was a great advance in resolving many ambiguities. In the case of the Elamite version, they improved many of Nuris's readings, and the later editions, such as Weisbach in 1911, have been based on this edition with emendations and new readings added. However, as the cuneiform text was set in type and the wedges buried as a standard form, it doesn't represent the idiosyncrasies of the original engravings or imperfection. Accordingly, many ambiguities and embedded errors were retained in the later editions. For instance, since the traces which they observed and recorded were in the type form, Many of them cause misunderstanding by letter scholars. It seems that their materials didn't represent the detailed engravings to them. Some errors could be found in reading of discernible signs. For instance, not a misunderstanding of legible as bu in line 24 of the first column. As the other example, at the footnote according to line 23, they recorded the traces of re, ashtu, and ma, but as they were in the standard type form, they have been ambiguous for the other scholars to be discerned. Also, as the entirely eroded gaps, they just copied Norris's registrations without considering traces and available spaces. On the other hand, this edition appeared at a period when many of the Elamite texts still hadn't been published, and as to the Achaemenid Elamite texts such as Persepolis tablets, otherwise a treasure trove in the study of the Elamite still had not been found. In 1948, Cameron studied and took quizzes of the whole cuneiform text. He conducted his project at a period when the knowledge of the Elamite was greatly developed. With regards to Achaemenid Elamite, Assyriologists were conducting the research on the Persepolis tablets. However, due to severe damage to the quizzes, Cameron didn't succeed in preparing the new edition of the whole Elamite version. He eventually published only several of his readings in 1960 without related photos to verify them. Later, Richard Halley inserted his new suggested corrections for some readings of the Elamite version in the glossary of Achaemenid Elamite in 1969. In addition, other Assyriologists, such as Francois Walla, and Guillaume Suzini, Herne Schmidt, and Melbourne Lava, published their editions, including some new readings. However, as their research was basically relied on previous editions and they hadn't had access to accurate copies, many of their interpretations don't match the inscriptions engraving, and many ambiguities have remained in their works. I'm sure some other invaluable researches have been conducted on the Elamite Behistun by scholars, but unfortunately, I haven't had access to them. Therefore, such deficiencies show an urgent need to take accurate copies of the inscription aimed at reflecting its details with high quality and do research on them and establish a reliable text. To reach the inscription and obtain the copies without getting involved in difficulties, facilities like scaffolding is needed. Besides, due to advancement of digital imaging technology, it is possible to obtain the accurate images today, even if we use personal cameras. On the other hand, the Elamite is an extinct language, and no found linguistic relationship has been established for it. As we know, the decipherment of the Elamite version of the Royal Achaemenid inscriptions was not done by comparing lexical evidence like the old Persian text or recognition of Semitic cognates like the Babylonian ones. In fact, the analysis of the Elamite language had to proceed on a formally descriptive basis, with the other versions supplying the general contents. These facts induce us to explore a line Elamite text with areas of linguistic analysis. The Behistun inscription contains the longest Elamite text ever found. Therefore, its study is very significant for the investigation of the language. In recent years, some scholars, like Abdulmajid Arfai in Tehran, have studied the inscription. In the late 1990s, a photographic project was conducted by Zolfagari from the Tehran University, which produced a 3D map of the monument. Fortunately, the Behistun Cultural Heritage Center in Iran has taken some invaluable measures regarding the inscription. It is worth mentioning the installation of a scaffolding with a wide platform to easily reach the inscription and stand directly in front of that to perform photography works. In addition, a laser scanning of the inscription has been carried out by the auspices of the Behistun Center, which a group of scholars from the German Archaeological Institute have researched on its achieved images, and Water Kelman from the École Pratique d'Eautis in Paris has sought to provide a new edition of its Elamite version. Furthermore, Salman Aliari from the Tusha University has performed a research on the Elamite version based on his photos of the inscription and has published his new edition in 2014. I started research in 2013 with some background in Elamite text. I was focused on the preparing and the production of accurate copies and improvement of the edition of the text. For the documentation of this research, I needed to have original high-resolution photos taken directly from the inscription. By the permission of the Behistun Center in Iran, I planned to climb the scaffolding several times and took photos with the digital high-resolution cameras. However, the problem with doing the photography of inscriptions such as the Behistun is dealing with daylight or the natural phenomena in the monument. Furthermore, image distortion is inevitable. Therefore, I needed to measure column dimensions in order to scale and prepare the images for copying the inscription. Now I'm going to describe the method I use for producing accurate copies of the inscription. Fortunately, the Elamite columns have been carved on the flat, smoothed surface of the rock with a rectangular shape, and it makes them easier to scale. So using Photoshop, I selected several photos which depict the measures and overlaid them with a larger picture of the same angle to have a metric reference for the analysis. Then I directed the whole column via these references so that the horizontal distance between every two grids is 1 centimeter. Consequently, it became possible to determine the exact position of the measures through these references photos and use them as a basis for examining the Elamite version. These new images have the advantage to reduce the potential misunderstanding. As depicted in the examples, the position of traces and distance between signs are discernible. Here I should mention that we are dealing with a large inscription containing extensive erosion. The study is time-consuming and would be painstaking. It is necessary to examine the cuneiform text in detail. Using the photos without any scaling yields a mistake in realizing the traces as well as the signs filling the gaps. With the new method, we were mostly prevented from such errors. In addition, by using the software, it is possible to analyze the cuneiform text and restore the damaged sign. This method has an advantage to working on the original images and maintaining its idiosyncrasies. I have researched the Elamite version based on the following steps: reading the cuneiform text directly from the inscription, recognizing traces and determining the signs filling the gaps, representing new illustrations through the mixed images, collation of reading of the Elamite text with the earlier editions, also comparing them with the old Persian and Babylonian correspondences, and producing hand copies and then preparing a new edition. obviously, many earlier readings should be corrected. Apparently, in the previous examination, errors in reading the cuneiform text has caused some misunderstanding. Fortunately, a lot of traces are discernible through the high-resolution photos, and the tips of wedges are visible. Surely it helps us to discern written signs and restore them. It is also worth saying that the reading of columns greatly helps us to estimate the available spaces and restorations filling the gaps. By using this method, we might be able to restore the damaged or even the illegible signs. The mixed photos can be considered as accurate copies on which further studies can be based. Archaeologists can examine them in their research and even judge the new readings. Furthermore, I have tried to replicate the inscription in the hand copies and record the information about the idiosyncrasies in the margins. As the Elamite version contains a line text with a variety of terms, phrases, clauses, and sentences, these copies would be a reference for studying Achaemenid Elamite grammar. Furthermore, the improved edition of the Elamite version and the suggested corrections to the earlier readings, particularly of the first column, are the main achievements of the research. According to the first and the third columns, I have corrected a lot of earlier restorations or suggested my readings. Some of them would be significant from the linguistic point of view. Amongst them are some new suggested verbal forms or derivatives, which I hope to be ascertained by other scholars. In comparison to previous studies, the new research is offering a new edition, which is matching the original text more than ever. The edition of the first and the second columns have been published articles in Cuneiform Digital Library Bulletin, and I will submit the articles according to the third column soon. The research has not been limited to only preparing a new edition of the Elamite Behistun. Clearly, the one who studies the inscription would be eager to do a research on the related topics, which I have summarized as follows. The phenomenon of multilingualism in the royal inscriptions of the Behistun of the Persian Empire and the literary stemma of the Behistun inscription. The trilogy of the Behistun is a version which has been produced from an original text with some literary variations and new pieces of information added. Archaeological evidence substantiates that they were not engraved at the same time. At first, the older Elamite version to the right of the reliefs was engraved, and then the Babylonian version in 54 paragraphs to the left of the reliefs, including the number of casualties and captives, as well as Semitic months names. After that, the old Persian version in 70 paragraphs was engraved, in which the above-mentioned statistics have been omitted, while the Iranian months names were written instead of the Semitic months. Furthermore, a new paragraph was added in the end. Eventually, the new Elamite text in 54 paragraphs was engraved, including the Iranian months names without any statistics, finished the Babylonian version after erasing the older one. On the other hand, the Aramaic and Babylonian fragments, which are copies from the Behistun text, have been found in Egypt and Babylon. These collections would encourage scholars to study the literary stem of the Behistun inscription, as the inscription has also been influenced by literary traditions, namely those of Urartians and Assyrians, or even the Medians. A tricky question would arise. How had the process of preparing the Behistun versions been after being dictated by the king? It is worth saying that some scholars, like Chul Hyun Bae from the Seoul National University, have published their invaluable research. Research on the older Elamite version. This version, which was arranged in 4 columns, was entirely erased by the engravers just after making room for the relief of the captured city of Sigmuka. As evidence shows, this version was the first long one to be inscribed in the Behistun. I should mention that the Elamite version, which I have studied, is a copy of the older one and was placed to the left of the old Persian inscription after erasing the older Elamite version. Since it is located on a high precipice and that its text has been entirely illegible, there have been no copies or editions published so far. George Cameron, who visited the inscription in 1948 and 1957, quoted that the text of the older version, as its contents are identifiable, is in any respect identical with the newer one. However, contrary to his belief, some differences could be found between the 2 versions. Regarding the 3 lines beneath the relief, which are vaguely legible, corresponding to lines 62 to 65 in the first column of the newer Elamite version, there is a differences that I have found based on my examination in line 74 of the first column in the older version. The Elamite Mara means saying has probably written just after the quotation, "I am Nebuchadnezzar, son of Nabonidus." While this term hasn't been written after the mentioned quotations in the line 62 in the newer Elamite newer version. We know that the Elamite Mara appears after some other quotations in the Elamite Behistun as well as some Persepolis texts. Despite being erased by the engravers, tips of wedges are discernible in its many parts, so it is possible to restore lots of damaged signs as well as the text, then collect it with the text of the newer Elamite. I suppose that there would be some differences between the content of the 2 texts, and in a personal communication which I had with Abdolmajid Arfai in Tehran and Gian Pietro Bazzello from the University of Naples, they have suggested some significant opinions regarding the differences. The interpretation of the 70th paragraph of the Behistun and the problem of innovating the old Persian script at the time of Darius or earlier would be one of the main subjects to be researched. The 70th paragraph is situated at the end of the 4th column of the old Persian version, which is seriously suffering from erosion. Thus many of its key terms that helps us to read and translate the paragraph have been illegible. Consequently, there has been an ambiguity in understanding the Darius's message in the 70th paragraph. The latest suggested reading has been produced by Rüdiger Schmidt in 1991. Based on Schmidt reading, the 70th paragraph announced that by order of Darius, new scripts or what Schmidt has translated as the form of writing in Aryan has been innovated. Besides, the signature as well as the genealogy had been put on the new writing too. Despite the uncertainty in reading of the some cuneiform sites in the paragraph, its Elamite correspondence is entirely legible. However, there is an argument over the Elamite term tupime, whether it means script or text. As a result, there is a controversy amongst the Assyriologists as regards the innovation of the old Persian script in Darius' time. Some scholars, such as Walter Hinz, believe that the old Persian script had been innovated by order of Darius, and the archaeological evidence also supports it. On the other hand, some others, like Pierre Lecoq, rejecting this opinion, believe in the existence of the old Persian script in the time before Darius. In addition, as the interpretation of the other key terms like hish, mean generally translated as name, and epi, probably means genealogy, are still unclear, there have been ambiguities in understanding the message that Darius is going to get across in the 70th paragraph. Does it imply the titulatures that Darius used in the first paragraph of the Old Persian and the Newer Elamite versions? Are they relevant to Darius' ancestors, which he names in the first two paragraphs? Assyriologists like François Valla, Melmran Lava, Guyot Suzini, Clarisse Herneshby, and so on have conducted invaluable studies and published their results. At the end of the talk, I hope I could have more discussions about these topics in the future, and my shared experiences would be helpful for others who have a plan to study of the inscriptions like the Behistun. Thank you very much for the time you spared and listened to my talk.
Thank you so much. This was genuinely mind-blowing. The amount of work you've been able to do is incredible. And the grids that you've produced to be able to analyze the inscription is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We have a couple of questions before we move on to the next session. Is there any publication in which we can find all of the translations and transliterations of all the different versions, all different languages in the Behistun inscription, or do we still have to look across different publications to find everything?
Excuse me, could you repeat your again?
Absolutely, sorry. Is there a single publication that contains all of the versions of the inscription, or do we have to look at individual publications for each language?
There have been many. There have been a lot of editions of that published from the Behistun inscriptions. If we want to refer to comprehensive editions of the three languages, he can refer to King and Thompson edition published in 1907, and these editions contains all the text of the Behistun inscription, Old Persian version, Elamite one, and the Babylonian version. Of course, some invaluable researchers independently have been conducted, and but more of them based on the King and Thompson edition. As I mentioned, unfortunately, as the Behistun had been inaccessible in prior eras, and the scholars had no choice but to refer to, for example, King and Thompson in his King and Thompson publication, and and with footnotes that they had in their editions, for example, and their accounts written regarding their reading, and I could answer to your question. I could answer to your question.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. And we have 2 more questions before we move on. Do you know if the cuneiform markings were painted at all to make them easier to read from a distance?
Your question, reading of the cuneiform, reading of the cuneiform mark, excuse me, you mentioned?
Would they have been painted or colored to make them easier to read?
I have produced the hand copies that I think that I have tried to paint all of the cuneiform signs, all of the cuneiform signs of the Behistun. And if anyone interested to have, I can send to him. I can send to him or her.
Thank you. Do you know if the inscription on the rock would have been painted?
On the work, you mean that on the work, you mean on the inscription itself?
Yes.
And the inscription itself, you know, it has been squeezed by not painting, just I think the first one, and the first one would try to paint the cuneiform text directly from the inscription was Rawlinson, and then as the squeezes has been applied for taking the copies, and we need the copies of the inscriptions in order to work on.
Thank you so much, Mr. Parian, for your time and your expertise.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I apologize, I couldn't answer your questions well.
You did perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.